Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. I am your Din, constant reader Scott Daly.
And I'm King Newbie Matt Freeman, coming to you, Don Din.
This week, we begin the third and final section of Wolves of the Calla, part 3, titled The Wolves. Ooh, they're coming. We'll be discussing the first 2 chapters of this part of the novel. First, Roland is reeling from Susanna's surprise announcement that she knows all about the baby, and the gunslinger is forced to reconsider his actions over the last few days. Then, Eddie heads to New York City to palaver with Cal Tower. Matt, what did you think about this week's reading?
Are you asking as Din?
Yes.
I love it. It's this bit felt like classic Dark Tower to me. We've got doors between worlds wrapped up in these tense character moments. We've got big ideas and themes right next to beating up mobsters rather. It's, I don't know, it's just kind of has everything that I love about this story. And when you ask me like, what is this section about? I'm like, I don't know, like a lot of stuff happens in here. It's just a bunch of fun stuff, and I can't wait to go through all of it. Yeah,
there is a lot of fun stuff. There's a lot of things going on. I mean, I think the first chapter here kind of serves as kind of Roland. As I said, he's reconciling the choices he's made over the past few days, and he's reconsidering what he should do and what he needs to do and everything. And I think, Father Callahan shows his role in the story, in the ways in which he pushes against Roland. And then we move into this delightful trip to New York City with Eddie that, you're right, is just classic. Like, this is what made the Drawing of the Three so fun, is these forays into New York City from Midworld. And I think it's so interesting that Eddie is kind of assuming the Roland role. Like, this is what Roland did when he went to New York City, and now it's Eddie, because he's more of Midworld now than he is of Earth, whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, in many ways, right? Yeah. Can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah. So tons to talk about. Let's not waste any time. We're going for 2 hours again. I'm saying this because the last time I said it at the front of the episode, it worked. So I'm going to say it again. 2 hours. Let's do it.
All right, sounds good. Let's do it.
So we begin our reading this week with chapter 1, titled Secrets. And this week's reading begins with Roland in a shithouse, which, that seems fitting, doesn't it, Matt?
Yeah, that works.
It is the morning after the end of Callahan's story, and we take a whole page here to observe the privy that Roland is relieving himself in. Of particular note in this bathroom is a photo of Jesus, the man Jesus, with his reddish locks spilling over his shoulders and his eyes turned up to his father, Big Sky Daddy. This photo of the man Jesus unnerves Roland to the point where he thinks that if it was not in profile, if Jesus was looking at him straight on, he would not be able to do his business. He would not be able to relieve himself. And I think, Matt, like, this is this little tiny 3-paragraph section at the very beginning of this chapter, and it's such a fascinating place to start in this particular chapter. And I wanted to talk about it a little bit with you before we move on.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think the last couple of weeks we've talked a lot about the idea of shame, which, that feeling, which, as Jake said, seems to be pretty much reserved for people who don't know what they're doing. And here we have a very direct image of a guy who can't do his dirty, shameful peeing if Jesus is looking. I mean, clearly the point is that Roland is already feeling self-conscious here, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's reeling off of a night in which Susanna, as he says later, proves braver than any of them by coming forward with the thing she knows. And he is in a place in which, you're at your most vulnerable when you're on the bathroom on the toilet, and you have the Son of God staring down at you, or at least judging you from his place on the wall of this thing. And I like there's this beautiful little image here where King has Roland realize that Rosa, because she's a woman, sits down to pee, and so she doesn't have to look into the eye of Jesus as she's doing her business. Jesus is kind of looking over her shoulder, and I like that as just a really good comparison to, like, Roland does not have this force over his shoulder. He was looking it straight on. He was looking into it, and so it's his relationship with it is so much different.
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting.
Yeah, sure. It's like, I mean, normally he's the kind of person who you think of as being able to, look God in the eye, or at least that's how he thinks of himself. And I think the fact that he's in the state that he's in, he can't look God in the eye here. That's how bad he's doing. That's how unsure of himself he is here.
Yeah, definitely. And I like that his response is to laugh when he realizes that. It's like, oh, she's facing the other way. It's like he turns it into just a big joke. And we might be reading too much into this particular image, but hey, that's what we do.
That's the whole point.
Yep. So we learned that it's close to noon and that Roland has slept until almost this moment, which is like very late, especially for someone like Roland. It seems almost insanely late, actually. We were told that they were up very, very late last night, palavering until about 4 a.m. But in an interesting structural decision here, King chooses to basically leave that entire palaver out of the narrative. We get like a very, very quick summary of what they talked about, both through Roland's internal narrative, but then also through his palaver with Callahan. But we don't actually get to see this all important scene where she comes forward and tells what she knows and they talk about it. We don't get to see that play out, which is really interesting, right?
Yeah, it's a very interesting structural decision. Yet again, for the second or third time, we're being left out of potentially important conversations and developments. Like how, development specifically, not conversations. Like how we guessed Eddie, we guessed that Eddie not telling us what the wolves look like is basically a sign that our kef as the reader is weakening. Our kef as the reader has gotten so poor that we've missed this whole critical palaver and we're just getting filled in with scraps of information. It occurred to me as I was thinking about this, like, what is third person omniscient if not our kef with the characters?
Yeah. That's I like that framing a lot. I do. And I think you're right. And I think the reason why this stands out to us so much is because it's different from the way King has normally done it, right? Like if this was the standard way in which he relayed information to us, we probably wouldn't have noticed it as much. But like, you almost think starting this chapter that you realize it's the next morning and you think King's doing that thing where he starts, en media res, and then he's actually just going to flash back to the palaver. We're going to, start in the future and then flash back to the past to see the conversation play out. But it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
And that is a different structural thing than he normally does.
Yeah. And it's not like I really needed or expected us to sit through a 4-hour conversation.
No.
It's more like it just felt like there was a disconnect. It felt like there was a gap where Susanna brings this confession forward, and then it just like kind of a hard jarring cut toward like, oh, we just skipped over the part where Roland admits that he shouldn't have held it back, and
right.
all of the presumed twists and turns of that conversation and all of their conclusions they came to. Like like you said, we got a very, very high level summary, but we didn't really get like, okay, but what are you going to do about it? What's the plan? What's everybody's feelings about it? It's not, we feel out of the loop. That's really what stands out to me. We feel we don't really know where these characters' heads are at right now.
Yeah, I mean, especially since we're kind of, throughout both of these chapters, we're very removed from Susanna's point of view. We don't see inside her head basically at all. And so it is interesting that like throughout most of this, with the exception of like Roland bringing up abortion because he told Father Callahan he basically had to, they don't reference what's going on with Susanna at all. Basically, they don't talk about it with her. They're not talking about it. It's like it's a been there, done that conversation that we, the reader, weren't part of. So yeah, that's what makes it feel different and weird. And I think a gap is a perfect way to describe it. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
So then we get this little quote here that I need. There's a lot here to talk about, Matt, but we'll just read it first and then we'll talk through it. He found himself thinking of Ka, which he rarely did. Eddie, who believed Roland thought of little else, would have been astounded. Its only true rule was stand aside and let me work. Why in God's name was it so hard to learn such a simple thing? Why always the stupid need to meddle? Every one of them had done it. Every one of them had known Susanna Dean was pregnant. Roland himself had known almost since the time of her kindling, when Jake had come through from the house in Dutch Hill. Susanna herself had known, in spite of the bloody rags she had buried at the side of the trail. So why had it taken them so long to have the palaver they'd had last night? Why had they made such a business of it? And how much might have suffered because of it? So there's so much here, Matt. The first that we have to talk about is Roland saying, I rarely think of Ka. Right?
Yeah.
Sure, Roland.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I mean, to me, it's sort of like say like a priest like Callahan saying he rarely thinks of God, where like there's a sense in which God is so much the fabric of a priest's life that you might correctly say they don't really contemplate God all that much, although God is like a subtle part of everything they're doing. And I think maybe this, like, I'm trying to be generous to Roland here, like maybe this is the sense in which he means this, because Ka is sort of like God to Roland, or a god, a greater than human force. It is sort of part of everything for him, but he doesn't philosophize about it all that often.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you disagree with that even, because it's not like he never waxes philosophical about Ka either. Like he certainly has before.
Yeah, I mean, how like I don't know if I'd classify when like someone says why Roland and he says Ka as him, philosophizing about Ka. I think it's just him saying it because it's an answer to a question without having to actually answer the question.
I mean, it's basically like inshallah or if God wills it or any of the, like, it's funny. I don't remember what the Christian framing of that is, other than if God wills it. That's what Christians say, right? Anyway, if God wills, right? Yeah. Which, that's literally, I mean, not literally, but it's very, very close to being the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when Christians say God willing, like, they're not pondering God. They're not pondering the existence of God and what it means, what it actually means to say if God wants this to happen. Like, I think you're absolutely right there.
There you go. Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to talk about here is, in light of the truth coming out, Roland has basically in this paragraph completely reversed everything he said to Jake last week, right? Last week he said it was our duty to let Ka do what it wills, and therefore he was going to do nothing and just let Ka take its course. Now, suddenly, his refusal to share information about Susanna is meddling with Ka, is taking action. The act of not doing anything is taking action. And I think he's finally gotten it right here. Like, I think we talked last week about the God sending boats metaphor, right? If Ka is in charge of everything, and Ka allowed Jake to have a dream where he figured out about Mia, if Ka allowed Roland to discover what Mia does on her hunts, well, it kind of fucking seems like Ka wants them to talk about this whole Mia thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It is fairly obvious, but also it seems like a paradox in a way, because, like, say that you walk outside and you see a rake in your front yard that doesn't belong to you. Is Ka giving you the rake because you're going to need the rake? Or should you just wait for Ka, like a wind, to blow the rake along to its true intended destination, which might be someone walking by? There's no way to know. You basically have to try one choice or the other choice and then see what happens next. And then even then, like, what happens next, like, if 19 birds shit on your head next, okay, was that because you did the right thing or the wrong thing?
Yeah.
I mean, I get, like, I agree with you. Like, it does seem like this was the obviously bad choice that Roland made, but, like, I still think, like, decoding what Ka wants you to do is never going to be obvious.
Well, it's so funny because I think it's the same thing that people struggle with when we're talking about free will versus God's plan, right? Like just our conversation to God willing. Okay, so, like, what if everything is going according to this plan, what do my choices matter? Then he's here saying, like, I was meddling with destiny, meddling with Ka by making a choice to withhold information. But wasn't that just Ka? Like, I think this is the inherent contradiction to this stuff, and this is why it's so confusing, and why I think they say scholars could study Ka for their lifetime and still not fully understand it, because it's seemingly contradictory in its very nature. Like, how can you go against the will of Ka? Well, you can't. But now here he's saying, well, I was fucking meddling with it. Well, were you, though? I mean, so it gave you just enough control to not do the right thing while also providing you with the right thing?
Yeah.
It's like, I think a lot of Christianity has said, like, well, God will present you with the choice, but you still have to make it, right? Like, he'll put the door in front of you, but you still have to walk through it. But that's not really destiny then.
Yeah. Well, and also in this, I mean, in this particular case, it was just not clear what he should have done.
Right. I think it was. I mean, I think it was clear. It's like, talk to your family, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, that's what we all agree he should have done, right? But I don't know, man. I think there is a paradox between, fate and free will, right? Like the two ideas are incompatible. They just are.
Sure.
You have to. I mean, I think that's the playground the book has chosen is how do we play with this paradox? I don't know if it's going to resolve the paradox. I doubt it will, because I don't think it's possible. But I think we're playing in the space of this contradiction, and it's fun. I like stories that take sort of irreconcilable ideas and just mash them together for fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that King struggles with himself too. I mean, like, we've talked about him as a man of not faith but spirituality. He believes in something, but he's not a fan of organized religion. Every religious character in his stories like show that to be true. But again, Callahan is a person who had a lot of weaknesses and has found his way back to something. But, well, I guess maybe that's a good conversation to talk about after we have a conversation with Callahan.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
But yeah, I mean, I agree with you that this the more we learn about it, the less we understand, which is the great irony of it.
Yeah, it's true.
So Roland, I think, actually puts this whole thing another way when he's talking to Callahan, and I like this. When he asked me what we should do, I gave him bad advice. I told him we'd best to let Ka work itself out, and all the time I was holding it in my hands like a caught bird. So once again, just like we were talking about, this is him admitting that everything he said last week was the exact opposite of the truth, right? That like choosing to do what he was doing was making a choice, whereas he was claiming it was to resist the idea of making a choice.
Yeah. At least now he acknowledges that it was bad advice and he was wrong. Yeah. So that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, again, we don't see him like go, "Hey, Jake, I'm sorry."
Right. Well, that's what, like, if they really did talk for like several more hours, you're like, oh, well, then surely Roland apologized and took stock of his mistakes. And it kind of seems like he didn't, I guess. Like we have to assume that he didn't. So
yeah, I mean, I think there's scenes that we see later in the chapter that show like this is not him apologizing, but it's him like attempting to fix things in his way, in his very Roland way. Mm-hmm. We'll maybe get to that when we get to it.
Yeah.
But so Roland bumps into Callahan, and the former asks the latter if he can hear his confession. And I love this quote. "The thought of absolution had never crossed Roland's mind, and he found the idea that he might need it, or that this man could give it, almost comic." So what? Wow, right? Matt discussed this.
Oh man, what a sentence. I mean, okay, so Roland is obviously carrying around this massive burden of guilt like all the time for Susan, for his mom, for Alan and Cuthbert, even for Jake, I think.
Sure.
All these people he feels that he let down, that he even now, we know that he feels the weight of it even now. He still has nightmares. Does this mean he doesn't really feel like he's responsible for those deaths? Or like, does he feel responsible but not in a way that requires absolution somehow? Or does he believe that maybe it can't be absolved? Because, see, like, absolution, I double checked this because I wasn't 100% sure of the definition, but absolution just means release from guilt.
Sure.
So maybe it's like Roland doesn't want to be released from the guilt, like he thinks he deserves the guilt. Or one more option, does he not realize how much guilt that he's carrying? Is he just blind to this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the latter is true. Like, I think we've seen enough of Roland to know that he recognizes all the bad things that he's done. Like, I think we saw it when he was at the unfound door and the people from his past screamed out at him, like his mom saying, "Roland, no, don't." Like he knows. I do think this is a very important statement about who Roland is as a person, though. Like, I mean, I think that, or this man could give it part is a little bit more transparent, right? It's a little bit more obvious there that he just doesn't think this person has the power to absolve anyone of anything. And I think the importance of the definition that you went to is really key here, that like, I need to be released from my guilt. I don't think Roland thinks he does. I don't think he thinks absolution. And I think there is a part of him, honestly, that is like, I am a slave to Ka.
Mm-hmm.
I am a slave to everything that happens to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so why would a person like that need absolution? Like what would absolution do for me in that situation? I don't have any choices in this.
That's right. Well, that's the thing is I'm very interested in that because those are really two very different framings, right? Like in the one, it's sort of like, no, this is my burden to bear. And the other, it's like, there is no burden because I'm just a puppet of Ka and it's not my fault. And it's like, well, I'm not 100% sure which branch it is for Roland.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me frame this a different way. You are a proponent of free will as an illusion created by our brains, right?
Yes.
So do you think absolution in that world is necessary?
I think that like guilt is one of those things that we evolved to keep track of ourselves as agents under the assumption that we have free will. And so you can't just decide, well, I don't have free will and thus I shouldn't feel guilt, because like the guilt part of the operating system operates inside the I am in control of my actions subroutine.
Sure.
I know none of this makes I'll, that's a good question. That's a really good question. I'll have to think about that.
Well, I mean, here's why I love talking to you about this kind of stuff, because before you and I really talked about this, I really rejected the free will as an illusion hypothesis because I viewed it as just an excuse to let people like behave any way they want and not have to feel bad about it. You know, like I viewed it in the least charitable light possible. And your framing of it is like, well, no, I do think this is something that doesn't exist and our brains are just tricking us into it. But because we have no choice, we still have to operate as if it's true because that's just the way our brains work. And I think that's a much more interesting framing than the one I was uncharitably giving it your point of view before we talked through this the first time.
Yeah. And even like me believing that I don't really have some kind of magical nexus of free will in my brain, like I still feel guilt and shame and all of these things, and I don't, and I never tell myself like don't feel that, because it's irrational to feel guilt because it's not real. It's like, well, no, it's real within the system by which it is defined. It's interesting because like another thing that this made me think of, which I think is related to what you just asked, maybe not, but like when I was a kid, I remember like doing like the first confession. Is there a name for that?
I think it's first confession.
You do your first confession, and that was the only time I ever did confession in my entire life, as a Catholic, because I was always like, I definitely did some sins, but like, and like I definitely get that God can metaphysically forgive me, but I don't think it would actually make me feel better, because I'm going to still feel guilty about the things I feel guilty about. And I'm going to honestly not feel guilty about the sins that I didn't actually think were bad. So I'm not going to confess. I don't know. I don't know if you can relate to that at all, one way or the other. I
mean, my the sacrament of reconciliation is the other name of it, by the way.
Yes.
My first confession was like I stole some micro machines from my friends because I was a child, and that was like those were the sins I was committing as a child. Right. And so I mean, I've never been a big proponent of that sacrament, even when I was going to church every week and active and all that stuff. Like it didn't make me feel comfortable to do that. Like it didn't have value to me. But I know what you mean, though. I'm trying to get my head around
Sure. Well,
this.
I mean, I bring it up because it's like, this is literally the thing the book is talking about, is this idea that you can get absolution by confessing your sins. And I'm like, well, Well, I literally never did, except for the time that I had to. I never did it because I didn't really believe I could get absolution that way.
Sure.
I believed that a man would tell me I was absolved, and then I was pretty sure I would walk out of that little room feeling the same.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to be maximally charitable to the sacrament, it's literally like therapy before there was therapy, right? That like just talking through the things you've done and the things that are weighing upon your soul helps you deal with them in some way.
That's true. And I think the Sunday school teachers would even say, like, it really makes you feel better to confess. And I would just be like, I don't believe you. But but I mean, they were probably telling the truth, honestly. Like, they probably did feel better. And
yeah, I mean, I can imagine, like, at a point where, like, you actually feel guilty about something that matters, not stealing micro machines from your friends, and that weighing on you heavily, that, like, being able to tell someone that, a person who represents the higher power you believe in, I think would be pretty important. So, yeah, I mean, but, like, the thing is, of course, Roland believes in none of this. And so this to him is just like, no. And I do think, we've spent a long time on this, but I do think that there is a part of Roland that needs it to be true, because then he would have to fully deal with everything that he's done. And even post Wizard and Glass, when he's confronted that thing for the first time, I still think, it's difficult to fully allow yourself to process that here's the choice you made. This is what you did. That's the trigger that you pulled. That's you decided that Susan was safe. You decided you were tricked. You let yourself become tricked. And I think that's something, like, if he can be absolved of that, then it is his fault. And that's scary to him.
And in a sense, him telling that story to his friends was a kind of confession. And even that didn't solve.
Well, and they tried to absolve him of it. I mean, you remember at Wizard and Glass, they'll say, like, Roland, you couldn't have known, like, we like that kind of stuff, and he just wouldn't have it. He just wouldn't accept it.
Shrugs it off. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Whew. Fun stuff.
Yeah.
It's times like these that I love doing this show, because we can have a 10-minute conversation on one sentence. Yeah. And I enjoyed the hell out of it.
Me too.
So Callahan then asks Roland what he fears the most, and he says, the breaking of the Tet. The breaking of the Tet, Callahan mused. Not the death of your friend, but the breaking of the Tet. I wonder if if your friends know what sort of man you are, Roland. And Roland's response is just this deadpan, they know, which they do, right? Like, I mean, I think that was part of Wizard and Glass too. It was a confession, Roland confessing to his friends, but it was also like, before we continue this journey as a Tet, you need to understand fully who I am and what I have done and what I will be willing to do in the future.
And on top of that, I mean, the circumstances of their meeting were him dropping Jake and then kidnapping Eddie and Susanna completely against their will, basically. So yeah, he's an asshole.
Yeah, definitely. They know better than anyone.
Yeah.
So Roland then makes the classic mistake of asking a Catholic priest if he knows where one might get an abortion in these parts.
Classic mistake.
Oops. Father Callahan is horrified and insulted that he would even ask him this. He goes so far as to say in this moment, not only would Rosalita not do such a thing, because Roland is like, she knows how to do it, right? But then he goes on to say that if he finds out Roland goes to anyone else in town, or gets it done, or even asks people about it, he will raise every hand in Calibran Sturgis against you long before they, being the wolves, come. So he's like, not only is this not an option, and I'm horrified that you even ask me, but if you even try, I will make sure that everyone in this town comes after you. What do you think about this, Matt? This is huge.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised and really caught off guard for a couple seconds before I realized, like, okay, this is a fun little situation the king has created, right? Because it's almost certainly very much on purpose, I think. Like, we've got the story element of Demon Baby. We've got Roland, famous slayer of unborn babies, that he doesn't like the look of. We're talking about the Sylvia Pittston episode, if anyone's unclear.
How could we forget that? Yes. I will never forget that.
It's burned into her. So how do we keep Roland from doing the logical, if distasteful thing, if the plot requires that the demon baby needs to be born? Like if Stephen King is sitting there saying, well, I need to get this demon baby born. Well, if you're Stephen King, or if you're Ka, or if those are the same thing, then you introduce a Catholic priest from your book about vampires, bada bing, no abortion allowed. I don't normally like to reach for Doyleistic explanations for things, but I think I'm enjoying doing that in this book, because I think that in a book this metatextual, I think it's more permitted.
Sure. Yeah.
But another comment on this, like, I'm not entirely sure that I believe that Callahan could actually like turn everyone against him, but
yeah, I mean, maybe not possibly with the abortion, but I think the revelation of the demon baby, they possibly could. Because I think that's one thing Callahan says to Roland here is like, no matter what you do, you cannot tell the people of this town about this kid. Because if they learn about that, game over.
You're probably right.
I mean, this is really interesting, right? Because I think Roland makes some good points here. It's like, it's not human. You wouldn't be killing a human. And the first thing it's going to try to do when it comes out is to kill its mom and eat her.
Yeah.
So like, I understand your strict, Catholic no abortion thing, but it's a demon. Like, can't we do an exorcism with my gun? But I think this makes sense for Callahan, this kind of reformed priest who lost his way, lost his faith, lost the favor of God in his mind, and spent years wandering, trying to regain it, and then finally gets to the Calla, finally gets to a place where he rebuilds a church where God has taken him back, and he feels like he has to stand true to his faith, to what he believes in. He has to be as strict as his faith requires on this, because this was not this exact thing, but this doubt in his faith and this doubt in his belief is what caused all these bad things to happen to him. So like, it makes sense from Callahan's perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were just talking about Ka for 150 hours, and I think that if Ka has a demon pregnancy situation and then puts a Catholic priest in your path, then maybe the obvious thing that Ka wants you to do is to not have the abortion.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's interesting because, like, we have to remember what Walter said last week too, which is like, you will help them in every way you can, and by doing so, you will damn them, right? And so like, we have this in the back of our head while all of this is happening. So like, every way in which Father Callahan is helping them, according to the Man in Black, is just ensuring the victory of the bad side. So we don't know what to make of that. Is that true, or is that just what Walter believes? We don't know. But it's in our head, right?
It's in our head. Yeah. I mean, he also said they would get eaten by the lobstrosities. So
yeah, true. I do love the detail in this is so good. King is such a good writer. Shocker, I know. Roland catches Callahan switching from calling her Susanna to calling her the woman as soon as he realizes the direction of this conversation. And I think that's such a really great detail that King has Roland catch up on, that this is no longer a conversation about an individual in which we are concerned about the health of the individual. This is no longer about Susanna or the threat of the thing inside of her. This is about principle. This is about belief. And in the world of principle and belief, it's not about humanity anymore. It's about my definition of right and wrong. So we reduce Susanna, a living, breathing person who's in danger, to the woman.
Yeah.
I love that.
The abstraction of woman. Yeah.
And I think that is King making a little bit of commentary on his feelings on the pro-choice versus pro-life argument.
Sure. Yeah.
I think there is a whole book where he makes his feelings on that a little bit more clear as well. It's called Insomnia, and one day we'll read it.
Okay. All right.
So Roland, of course, loses the fight about aborting the demon, but he does manage to at least turn things around on Callahan, right? Like, just like he does with Jake, he says, okay, I'll do it, but if anyone gets hurt because of this, it's your fault, and you are the one responsible for keeping an eye on Susanna. And he instructs him in the ways in which Susanna shows when she's going to be transforming into Mia. And then there's this really great quote here that I wanted to read. "I do not apologize for my beliefs," he said, "but if I have complicated your work here in the Calla, I'm sorry. Your man Jesus seems to me a bit of a son of a bitch when it comes to women, Roland said. "Was he ever married?" The corners of Callahan's mouth quirked. "No," he said, "but his girlfriend was a whore." "Well," Roland said, "that's a start."
I love it. I love it so much.
I don't have anything like clever to say here other than this is the kind of like borderline sacrilegious deprecation that like I think Catholicism is all about. Like it's such a Catholic thing to say.
Yeah,
I love it.
It is. Yeah, it is a Catholic joke, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I also like about this dialogue that like they're obviously pissed at each other, but you can see behind it that they don't really want to be enemies. Like they regret that this has come to pass.
Yeah. I mean, they are, as Roland has hypothesized, Tetmates, right?
Yeah.
That Callahan is a part of this Tet. He's a part of this group. His destiny is intertwined with them. So yeah, they find themselves, attracted to each other in the same way that Eddie and Susanna and Jake and Oy and all of them have been. So yeah. So Roland then has a chat with Eddie, who finally tells the gunslinger the story that Graham Pear told him and what he saw underneath the wolf mask. Roland freaks the fuck out immediately, and we get this. Roland's glare of triumph was so brilliant it was frightening. "Gray horses," he said. "All the horses the exact same shade. Do you understand now, Eddie? Do you?" "Yep," Eddie said. His teeth appeared in a grin. It was not particularly comforting, that grin. As the chorus girl said to the businessman, "We've been here before." Except, well, King still holds back this information from us, the reader, Matt. Why?
Yeah. Okay, but at this point, I'm still wondering if the gray horses thing refers to the black and white horse in The Wizard of Oz. I have no better guess as to what the wolves are. The only really new pieces of information we learned this week is that they're really important. Like, it's really important that you nail them at the top of their head specifically, not anywhere else.
Sure.
But what you're asking is
no hypothesis about that at all.
I mean, the closest thing is like, okay, there could be like robots and their like controller chip is at the top of their head, but I don't care for that. That's just the only extra thing that I've thought of.
Okay.
You're asking why is King holding it back from us? I mean,
right. That's the question.
Yeah, and I'm basically like, well, I mean, that is really weird because you, as we pointed out a dozen times at this point, like he loves to tell you in advance. He's not that fond of keeping a secret. That's not really his style. I mean, I guess now he's done it in such a big way here that I have to maybe relax on that stance that it's not his style and say like, okay, well maybe he does it sometimes, but like at this point it's building up to be such a big important reveal that I'm almost like, well, this had better be a goddamn impressive surprise because we've really been playing this out.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know what it could be that could be so shocking that King would choose to hold it back like this. Yeah,
I mean, when this first happened, I think we hypothesized that, and I'm saying that word a lot today, I don't know why, that the reason this was happening was because the Tet was fractured. They were broken. And so the sharing of information with them and with us was damaged. And the only way to get this to happen was to fix it again. And they had this palaver, long 4-hour palaver, and they seemingly have gotten back on the same page. And yet, once again, King is withholding this information from us. Eddie has now finally shared it with someone else. But still not us. Still not us. And even at the end of this week's reading, not us. We have another chapter and a half of book to talk about, and we still don't know. So yeah, I mean, my explanation for why King chose to do it this way is looking thinner and thinner as the Tet kind of starts to heal itself a little bit. Or maybe that's just an illusion. Maybe they haven't actually fixed their problems. I mean, there are still secrets, right? Like that. This is a chapter titled Secrets, and each person is still keeping secrets from each other. Yeah,
I think that they haven't healed their connection yet. I think that we kind of wanted that palaver to be the moment when they healed their rift, but I think that Katet is still very wobbly. Let's put it that way.
And perhaps the reason King did not let us see that palaver is because it's not as important as we want it to be. Like we want that to be the healing of everything, the repairing of everything conversation, and it's not. And so it's not important enough for us to take the time to see it. Yeah. Maybe.
I think that makes a lot of sense, actually. Like you didn't really miss much. You just missed like Roland didn't really apologize. He did feel shame, but he didn't apologize, and no one felt any closer after the end of it.
they didn't even tell Susanna it was a demon, right? Like that's the conversation with Callahan where he asked directly, did you tell her what is inside her? And he said, she knows it isn't Eddie's. And he's like, okay, so that's a no.
Right. Right.
I mean, she could probably get there herself, but he's still holding things back. They're still not facing the truth quite as head on as perhaps they should.
Yeah, they're not facing it together, right? He's still trying to stage manage her.
Yeah. So the story then steps back a bit as we let 5 days go by in a flash, and the narrative voice kind of takes over the story for a bit as King spends like a page and a half musing on the hundreds and hundreds of uses of Kamala. I'm not going to read it. I really wanted to, but I'm not going to. But I just find this whole part absolutely delightful, and like how clinical and referential it is. Like it's almost like a reference book. Like here's all the ways in which people use Kamala. It's not a point of view of any of our characters. This is truly just our storyteller talking to us, the reader himself. I think it's great.
Yeah, I thought it was a great device for sort of showing the passing of time. I also think it's just kind of neat how King was indeed slipping out of third person into omniscient narrator voice and just sort of telling us this information, but I didn't really notice. It felt very natural to me. And I think that's actually a high skill maneuver in writing. Like normally if you're going to change from, close third person to omniscient, it's going to be jarring, but it was not at all. I didn't really notice it until you kind of drew it out for us here.
I now have a mental image of you and I like judging a figure skating competition and being like, ooh, the difficulty level on this jump is really high. So let's see if you can pull it off. Oh, perfect.
Triple axel.
So during these 5 days, the quartet continues to schmooze or come bring a Kamala with the Calla. Jake continues to go each night with Benny Slightman, even though he doesn't quite understand why he's still doing this, and Susanna begins her time with the Ariza. King then drops us back into the real-time movement of the story on the day of Susanna's demonstration, which is, we're told, is 8 days after their big palaver. Susanna rolls out with some personally crafted Docker's clutches that will allow her to dual-wield some 4 special plates, and dual-wield she does, throwing 8 plates perfectly. Her quartet is so wonderfully proud of her.
It's a very cool moment. I admit I'm surprised that there was no moment of Susanna looking at the plates and being like, oh my God, the blue 4 special plates from my backstory. That just didn't happen at all. So
yeah, because the text has removed us from Susanna's point of view, right? Like we none of these chapters we jump where we see Jake, we see Eddie, we see Roland. We even jump into Cal Tower's head for a little bit there. We don't go into Susanna's head during any of this.
Yeah.
Like this whole scene where she is throwing the Arizas, this is from the perspective of Roland. We guess at what she's doing, but we don't actually see what she's thinking.
Yeah. We even if we skip around to like what's Eddie's thought about this thing right here, we don't skip to Susanna at all, really, as far as I remember.
Yeah, and I love this writing. For a moment, Susanna only remained where she was, about 60 yards from the barn. Her hands lay between her breasts, the right covering the left. Her head was lowering. Her commates knew exactly what was going on in that head. I aim with my eye, shoot with my hand, kill with my heart. Their own hearts went out to her, perhaps carried by Jake's touch or Eddie's love, encouraging her, wishing her well, sharing their excitement. Roland watched fiercely. Would one more dab hand with the dish turn things in their favor? Perhaps not. But he was what he was, and so was she, and he wished her true aim with every last bit of his will. That's just beautiful. It's beautiful. I also like there's a lot of subtle things in here, like perhaps carried by Jake's touch or Eddie's love, which almost frames love as a magical device as well, right? Like their own hearts went out to her, carried by Jake's magical powers or just Eddie's deep unending love for her. It makes those two things a comparison, not just an expression, right? Not just like our hearts went out to her because we cared for her, but like almost literally we were communicating with her.
I took it to mean that it was more magical than figure of speech.
Yeah. The thing that I really want to talk about here though is like the way that King allows us to see the way the individuals react to these moments, right? Roland tells Susanna after this moment that she reminded him of her hawk when she screamed. You know, that thing that he sacrificed to win. And then we see here that to Jake, Susanna screaming Riza reminded him of his old pal Gasher from way back in Lud. You know, that monster that almost killed him. That's fascinating. Like, it's just these little moments where Roland is beaming with pride and compares her to a hawk, and then Jake is like shuddering uncontrollably because it reminds him of something horrible.
Yeah, I like this a lot. Those are such widely different things, such completely different reactions. And I think it really prevents us from making any simple, unambiguous judgments about what this means or how Susan is doing, right? We're just we're so off kilter about it. We're so off balance. Like, okay, so you kind of implied there, like, for one thing, does it mean that Roland is thinking of Susan as something that he's going to sacrifice to save the Calla? Does it mean that Susanna is going to turn into Mia and endanger Jake the way Gasher did, becoming monstrous? I mean, neither of those things, or some unpredictable combination of both of those things, or does this not mean anything in that sense? I mean, is it just showing that our characters are not really on the same page and they're reacting very differently to the same thing? Yeah, it's very, I don't know. It really struck me though. I really like this bit.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I do think Roland on some level sees the choices he's making as potentially sacrificing Susanna for the Calla, right? Because like his whole reasoning for hiding the Mia thing was that it could take Susanna away from him, and he needed her hands, he needed her plates now as part of this thing. He needed her for this moment to fight the wolves. So yeah, I think that. And for Jake's perspective, I wonder if this is him using the touch and getting a little bit of Mia in this, and that Mia bit is what reminds him of Gasher.
Yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I guess we'll find out, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of Jake, though, he's been very silent today. He's been thinking a lot, thinking about Andy and thinking about Ben Slightman. These the two people that he saw have this secret rendezvous that he hasn't told anyone about yet. And then he's also thinking about Ben Slightman the Elder's glasses that he traded for, glasses that nobody else in the entire Calla has. Jake thought it was a good story. He was sure Susanna would have believed it, assuming the singularity of Slightman's spectacles had occurred to her in the first place. He had an idea that Roland would have believed it too. Slightman told it in just the right way, a man who still appreciated his good fortune and didn't mind letting folks know that he'd been right about something, while quite a number of other people, his boss among them, had been wide off the mark. Even Eddie might have swallowed it. The only thing wrong with Slightman's story was that it wasn't true. Jake didn't know what the real deal was. His touch didn't go that deep, but he knew that much, and it worried him.
Man, all the Slightman stuff is so interesting, because eventually we realize that Roland pretty much knows what's up with Slightman anyway. So it's not like Jake is holding back, so it's not like Jake holding back this information is really hurting the quartet, because Roland is already suspicious of both Slightman and Andy. Yeah. Which is an interesting way of framing it, right? Like, normally if you're going to do this sort of thing in a story, it's going to be like, oh no, Jake should tell, because this is going to catch everyone off guard that they're traitors. And it's like, no, Roland already knows they're traitors, or at least he's suspicious. It's a interesting story choice, and I'm not sure where we're going with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right here that a normal structure would be like, there would be a consequence of this. But I think if we can guess at a point, it's to show that withholding information from your group is a waste of time in the first place. Like, what you only manage to hurt your relationship with the group and your connection amongst each other, and you're not withholding information that other people don't already know about. Like, that's the thing we've seen again and again, right? Like, they were terrified of telling Susanna about this whole thing, and she already knew about it.
Right.
Eddie or Jake is so worried about telling what he saw with he doesn't want to get his new friend in trouble. He doesn't know what to do with this. It's an adult scary choice. Roland already knows about it. Roland is choosing to hide the dry twist from everyone. We see at the very end of this week's section, Eddie has already picked up on this.
Yep.
Like, he knows something's going on. So, like, it just doesn't make sense to try to keep secrets, and all you're doing is hurting the psychological link between you. You're hurting your relationship. Like, if you're close enough with these people, you should just be honest with them because they're gonna know anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I can't believe I didn't put that together. But yeah, everyone's secret is something that it's not that keeping the secret is hurting anyone for any reason other than it hurts people when you don't share with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It makes them feel not appreciated, not respected, not loved.
Right. And
not part of the group.
Yeah. Indeed shows that you don't really trust them.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think it's interesting the way in which Jake frames this, though? He was sure Susanna would have believed it. Roland would have believed it too. He had an idea. Even Eddie would have probably bought it. Is like he going in ascending order of people's ability to sniff out bullshit?
I think so, actually. Like, which is funny. I don't know why he places Susanna below Roland, but I do think maybe he places Eddie above the others because he sees them as both, like, they're both like New Yorkers. I mean, Susanna's a New Yorker too, but Eddie's like a street, street person type.
Yeah,
like
Susanna was a rich dentistry heir. Yeah. I could see that.
I think it's kind of cute actually that he like respects Eddie in this way actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So a couple days later, the ladies of the Ariza have gathered to show off their skill. Eisenhardt's husband is there as well. He updates us on the status of their ability to persuade the town. We hear that they've convinced Eisenhardt himself, not Took, of course. And surprisingly, Matt, Cy Ovenholder is now against them too, right? It seemed like the last we were with him, it seemed like Arkatet had convinced him. But we learn here that nope, that he didn't. But then again, like, since they've gotten to the Calla, they haven't, like, he hasn't really been a character in this book, right?
Yeah. I do hope we find out what happens there. At this point, I'm interpreting it as like a big red flag that things are happening behind the scenes, maybe that the Katet aren't paying attention to.
Interesting.
Because if a big wheel changes their mind off screen, then we're like, well, okay, somebody's talking to somebody,
sure.
And like what happened there? What are we missing? So
yeah, we don't see a lot of the politicking from their perspective, but even that we just kind of yada yada over. Literally that the past 5 days they've been schmoozing with the town, but we don't see any of that. So yeah, there could be a lot of politicking happening on the other side that we are not privy to. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point for me is like there's a lot of room for stuff to go wrong. If especially if Roland is doing some complicated plan that involves like deception and intrigue, and then you've got who knows who, basically willing to be traitors to in their own minds they're gonna save the Calla, right? In the minds of the people who would go against Roland here, they're trying to save the Calla from these madmen who are trying to bring the wolves down on their heads and get them all killed.
Yeah. That's true. And I think the thing that I really like about this is this is from an earlier conversation, but how Callahan kind of reframes Roland's opinion of like early on in this book, the whole thing was like, no, you don't understand. You don't have to, like, we don't have to convince you to help us. Like, we're going to do what we're supposed to do. And Roland was very confident and very assured of that fact. But Callahan reminds him is like, okay, that's true. You're going to do whatever you need to do, but like, you need help. And the only way to get help is to like convince the townspeople to take up arms with you. And so it's so interesting that like he was so convinced of like the old ways and like you don't like, we don't have to ask you permission to help you fight the wolves. Like, but you still have to schmooze. You still have to politic. I think that's a really interesting wrinkle in this whole thing, because at the very beginning, we were pretty confident that, nah, you're all stupid. You don't understand. But it seems like Roland was a little bit wrong there.
Especially ever since it was clear that this is basically Roland is not doing anything right, the book.
Sure.
Like, I think toward the beginning of this book, I was like, yeah, Roland's got it handled. He's fucking Roland.
Sure.
But the book, like, this book has really gone out of its way to undermine our confidence in his kind of infallibility at complicated situations like this.
Sure. I like that. So the women compete in their plate throwing contest, and Rosalita wins, of course, because Roland only bangs winners, you know?
Yep. Yeah. Victory celebration tonight.
Nice. Yeah, and I think this is where we learn about that like they want you to aim for the top of the head, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Well,
whatever that means.
I don't know. I do.
You do.
But, yeah. So after the competition, Roland is sitting around and thinking about things, and that's when Susanna comes up to him and asks him, "Are you satisfied?" And he says, "Yes, I think all's well there. We have to hope it is, because time is closing now. Things will happen fast." The truth was that he had never experienced such a confluence of events, but since Susanna had admitted her pregnancy, he had calmed nevertheless. "You've recalled the truth of Ka to your truant mind," he thought, "and it happened because this woman showed a kind of bravery the rest of us couldn't quite muster up." And I love this because, again, this is Roland admitting to us, not to anyone else, but to us, I was wrong. She was right. She's the brave one. I'm the coward. I don't understand what's happening here. This is all new to me. He had never experienced such a confluence of events as this right here. This is all new to me. And yet he says all this silently, right? Like, this is like, it's so fascinating to me. Like, have you told this to Susanna? Have you said, "Hey, Susanna, that was really brave, that thing you did. Like I really appreciate you having the bravery to do what none of us could in that moment."
Yeah, we see no evidence that he has, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, basically, if someone's mission is to undermine the Khatet's communicativeness and sunder them in that way, like, they're definitely succeeding.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, speaking of that, Jake then asks to take the Ruger back with him to Rocking Bee Ranch, where he's spending the night. And when Roland questions why, Jake's response is, "Do you ask as my din?" Which, like, is so formal, right? Like, it's such a formal response to that. Like, going like, "Are you asking as my boss? Are you asking as my king? Are you
right.
it's, I think this is, first of all, Jake is like holding this thing really close to his chest because he's afraid of what Roland will say. He's afraid of being judged or having a conversation turn around on him this way. And this is kind of what, to me, settled the idea that, oh, Roland hasn't apologized to the boy. Like, the way Jake is acting here is Jake was right. Everyone found out Jake was right and did the right thing by confronting Roland about it. And yet he didn't get an apology for it. And so he's still just very uncertain around him. And so he's not going to tell Roland the truth unless he commands it as his leader.
Yeah. Well, Roland doesn't need absolution, so why would he apologize? like that's sort of a joke, but it's also true. Like he's not, I think that's one of his character traits, actually, is like, he doesn't really justify himself to people. He's just like, if he screws up really badly, he's just like, yeah, that was a mistake. Anyway, let's move on with our mission.
Sure.
Like there's no real emotional recognition, and there's no like asking for their forgiveness, or, I mean, I think he's probably asked for people's forgiveness some number of times. I don't remember it happening clearly, but it's probably happened at least once, right?
I'm sure it's happened once.
Did he ever actually apologize to Jake for dropping him?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
I don't think he did, actually. I think he said, "I won't drop you again," which is not the same thing as apologizing.
That's great. I love it.
Oh, Roland, you're great.
I love it. What a guy.
Yeah.
Just keep straightening those pictures in those hotel rooms, Roland.
Yep.
So, this is, in this moment, this is as close as he gets to an apology, I think, though. He says here, the request under Jake's request was to be on a longer rope. Simple as that. And so he recognizes that Jake is asking you to trust him. And so he chooses to do that, right? Like, and I think that is a Roland apology to me, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not going to just tell you, hey man, I screwed up, I'm sorry, but I am going to give you what you ask for here,
Right.
and that is my way of expressing my apology to you.
Yeah, you're gonna try to rectify the mistake, even if I don't verbally acknowledge the mistake.
Yeah, it is interesting that he only does this. Like, the text points out that it's because Susanna and Eddie are there, right? That, like, Susanna and Eddie, like, he sees them paying attention after Jake asks him the question. And it's like, okay, so if they weren't there, would you have said, yeah, I'm asking as your din, tell me. Why was it the awareness that they would call you out on your bullshit if they heard you do it? Why did their presence make you go down this path where you recognize what the question under the question? I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just before we move on from this, like, he says, do you ask is my din, right? So the din thing, pretty much just in this book, right?
Yeah. I think, yeah.
I don't remember it being introduced. I just remember suddenly people are using this word. Suddenly people are talking about Roland being the din.
Oh, well, okay. That's not exactly true.
Okay.
I believe they said they defined din way back, maybe in the first book, actually, when that Stephen was like the din of Gilead, his father. So they defined it as like a king leader type thing. But I like Don Din is new. Like the importance of it is new.
Well, but the idea that Roland is the din of the quartet, I'm pretty sure is only really referenced in this book. Like, everything felt a lot more egalitarian amongst them before this book. It all felt like, yeah, okay, Roland's the gunslinger. Roland's the one who knows how to shoot. Roland's going to teach you the skills. But you're all members of the quartet. You're all first class members of the quartet, and you're working together. And then with this book, feels not egalitarian at all. It feels like everyone's coming to Roland. Nobody's like much less emphasis on kind of like everyone's relationship with each other. It's all this hierarchical thing where it's like, you know, Eddie asking Roland, or you're my din, right? And Jake, the only person who hasn't had a big heart to heart about Roland about being the din is Susanna. And she's and that's partially because she's kind of off having her own problems.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just it's definitely jumped out to me, especially this week. Like, this is a new thing in this book. Not the word, but the idea that Roland is the boss.
Yeah, I went and jumped into Wizard and Glass real quick while you were talking and did a quick search. The only person that calls Roland the din of his quartet in Wizard and Glass is Blaine. So it's interesting. Yeah, I had never thought about it that way, but yeah. This is why reading this book with someone who's never read them before is fun, because like this is just a thing that's always been true to me, and I don't think about the fact that when was it introduced and what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I almost don't like him being the boss of the quartet. Like, I liked it more when it felt like they were all kind of equals, more or less.
Like a family.
Yeah, like a family. He's more experienced, but that doesn't mean he's in charge. Sure. But apparently now it does.
Yeah, it certainly seems to, right?
Yeah.
All right, so right as the Tet is about to break up for the evening, Eddie drops a bomb. He wants to go to New York to check on the date, to see how close they are to July 15th, Calvin Towers D-Day. But he wants to do more than just that. He wants to go there for real, not Todash, and try to buy the empty lot, because they've been really dumb, Matt. That's what Eddie says. If Calvin Tower has been waiting for these people, a certain person to sell the lot to, they don't need millions of dollars to do it. They just need to be the right people, which they are.
Yeah. It's really fun how fast this part goes from Eddie just kind of broaching the idea to, okay, we're doing it and we're going through the door. Like, the story really moves when it wants to. Yeah,
it does. It's so funny that like we've kind of been, biding time here as the quartet was splintering, and then now it's time to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was honestly shocked at how fast we're just there. We're already in New York.
Yeah, and we're in and out in a chapter. Yeah. There's this really interesting conversation here at the end of this chapter, Matt, that I wanted to talk to you about for a little bit. They basically theorize that this spot, this few blocks around 46th and 2nd work differently than everywhere else in the world. That here in this spot, time only moves forward. So Eddie says it's almost as if this place is some kind of different world, some kind of key world, he calls it. Other than being a convenient plot contrivance for why you just can't go back in time to prevent stuff from happening, what do you make of this?
I've said it to that. I mean, I guess if the rose is like a kind of axis around which the universe revolves, kind of like the tower in some ways, then maybe the world with the rose in it is Earth Prime. It's the Earth. It's the fundamental center around which everything else revolves, or around which everything else is a variation, or a variation of a variation.
Sure.
And thus, if that one world is the axis, then it's in some sense going to be like inviolable. Maybe like you can't change it because it's the Earth Prime.
Sure.
I mean, it does kind of make a certain metaphysical sense that there would be like one true world. Yeah,
but it's not even like the world. It's like 8 blocks, right? Like it's like this one area, this one area of New York City that Jake stumbled into way back in the Wastelands and said he immediately felt different here. He immediately felt like he was better, like it was somewhere else. And we're kind of seeing that's part of their hypothesis here. Is that like this is a different, we've almost entered a different world every time we come to these few blocks in Manhattan.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really think too much about that beyond just like, well, it's close to the rose and the rose is super magical. So
sure.
Yeah, I don't know beyond that.
Cool. All right. Well, let's move on to our second chapter, chapter 2, titled The Dogan, part 1.
All right.
Our second and final chapter of the week has Roland and Eddie travel to the unfound cave and then eventually to New York City. And on their way up there, though, we can see that Roland finally lets Eddie in on his little secret. The plan to hole up the kids in the Calla's version of Eyebolt Canyon is just a dodge, a mole hunt. And then we hear this line, Matt, that's just going to drive us crazy. Because I don't think there's anything supernatural about the way the wolves find their children. After hearing Grandpere Jaffert's story, I don't think there's anything supernatural about the wolves, for that matter. No, there's a rat in this particular corn crib. Someone who goes squealing to the powers that be in the thunderclap.
Damn it, King.
It's so interesting because I think this is one of those things where we already know half of this, right? Like they're talking about, I don't think there's anything supernatural about the wolves. I don't think there's anything supernatural about the way they find their children. Both of these things are mysteries to our, well, no, it's the exact opposite, actually. The thing that we know about is a mystery to our characters, or at least we're led to believe that. Like, at least Eddie doesn't know yet. We learn by the end of this chapter that Roland suspects that it's Ben Slightman, the Elder. But the thing that they know about, which is the true identity of the wolves, is the thing that we don't know.
Right.
And so it's so funny that way. We're like, it's dramatic irony. There's some dramatic irony on our side, and then they have some dramatic irony from us.
Yeah. I know, I, at the risk of repeating myself, I really do enjoy the idea that the characters are keeping a secret from us, just like they're keeping a secret from each other.
Sure.
Like you were just talking about this idea. Like that's exactly what's happening. The characters are keeping what is ultimately a pointless secret. That would be the funniest thing, actually, is like we learn what the wolves are and it's something really, really anticlimactic. And then it would be like, oh, why the hell did King keep that from us so assiduously? And it's like, oh, it doesn't matter. It's just to show you what it feels like. To show you that it sucks to have things kept from you.
Now you understand. Yeah. That's fun. Well, if and when we learn whatever the secret is, we can maybe revisit that.
Okay, cool.
So as they get to the cave, Eddie immediately hears voices himself. First, it's none other than the great sage and eminent junkie himself, Henry Dean, then his mother. The voices disturb Eddie, but he's able to pretty quickly pull himself away from them. Yeah,
that's good. I was thinking one voice that we might have heard but didn't is Eddie's sister, who tragically died. And it's funny because I haven't thought about that story element, about that, that element of his backstory in months at this point. But it did occur to me while I was contemplating that. I was like, well, time travel is a factor here. So you really have to wonder if her death couldn't somehow have been tied into the plot of the story, potentially.
Non-committal answer that means absolutely nothing.
Great.
So I really, really love this moment, though. You're not worried about me scoring, are you? Finding the man and getting high? Not at all, Roland said. There are plenty of things I am worried about, but you returning to your old habits isn't one of them. So we've been talking about regression a lot in these past few weeks. And as the quartet was falling apart, it seemed like Roland was regressing. It seemed like Jake was kind of going back and forth between being the boy and becoming the man that he is eventually bound to be. And then we have Susanna is literally struggling with identity issues once again, the thing that she was struggling with the first time we met her. But in one sentence, Roland makes it clear that no matter what happens or is happening with the quartet, Eddie Dean is no longer the person he was at the beginning of the story. He is no longer the guy who almost killed Roland just to get through a door and get some more drugs. He's not that person anymore.
Yeah, it's great. Although, sorry to poop on your parade, but that's because Eddie is now a tower junkie, not a heroin junkie. So,
well, sure. I think you're right there, and I think we're going to talk about this as Eddie goes, walking through New York City, but how Roland he is once he walks through that door.
Yeah, absolutely.
He has not regressed. He has transformed.
Yes, that's a good point. Yep.
And to the perfect image to seal that is Roland giving Eddie his revolver. And, it's so funny because King goes out of his way to draw attention to this, which is a thing that even Eddie in this moment points out is like, hey, you've been giving me this thing. Like it's not actually that big of a deal. Actually, no, it's the opposite. Eddie makes it a huge deal. It's like, Roland, you're giving me your gun? And Roland's like, no, you've been carrying this thing like almost as much as I have lately. It's not a big deal at all. I know you'll bring it back to me, whatever. But it's a symbolic passing of the torch, the gun, and Eddie assuming the role of the gunslinger, right?
Yeah.
And that's what he does in New York City.
Yeah, I mean, he's doing this extremely important mission for the quartet's mission, and he does it by himself, and Roland trusts him to do it. So, I mean, I do see this all as good. It's all a good sign, right? Like he gave Jake a gun and said, "Go off, gunslinger, I trust you." And he's giving Eddie a gun and saying, "Go off, gunslinger, I trust you." And I mean, I do think it actually means something that he's not having this conversation with Susanna. Like that's a problem.
He did give her a plate. He gave her, say, "Go off, daughter."
He did. So, but it's not a gun.
Well, there was that moment that we didn't talk about where Susanna says, I could just give up the gun.
Uh-huh.
I like these things a lot. And Roland is kind of shocked and horrified about that. The gun is the extension of his arm. It is in his name. It is who he is. And the idea that one of them could so easily give that up is not something he's prepared to deal with. But so we could really read into that if we wanted to.
You could go either way on that. You could say he did have that conversation where he said like, all right, I trust you, go throw the plate. But you could also say, well, he's not trusting her with the actual gun, which is what he sees as being the symbol of his office, as it were. Sure.
Yeah, that's very fair. All right, Matt. I copy pasted. Full disclosure, I copy pasted
like a page,
like a page of text here, and I really want to read it out loud, but that's ridiculous. I can't read it out loud. So I'm gonna read like the first 5 sentences of it, and that's it. The door with unfound written on it in some strange, lovely language. Once he'd read a novel called The Door into Summer by who? One of the science fiction guys he was always dragging home from the library. One of his old reliables, perfect for the long afternoons of summer vacation. Murray Leinster, Paul Anderson, Gordon Dixon, Isaac Asimov, Harlan Ellison, Robert Heinlein. He thought it was Heinlein who'd written The Door into Summer. It was, by the way. That's a Yeah. Henry always was ragging on him about the books he brought home, calling him the whittle sissy, the whittle bookworm, asking if he could read and jerk off at the same time, wanting to know how he could sit fucking still so long with his nose stuck in some made-up piece of shit about rockets and time machines. Henry older than him, Henry covered with pimples that were always shiny with Noxema and Stridex, Henry going into the army, Eddie younger, Eddie bringing books home from the library, Eddie 13 years old, almost the age Jake is now. It's 1977 and he's 13 and on 2nd Avenue, and the taxis are shiny yellow in the sun. And it goes on from here, and it's basically just this Stephen King just kind of like going off, like almost in the same trance that Eddie is going into to summon 1977 in his mind. And it's just it's beautifully written. It flows. It's quick. As I read, there are short sentences in there, 2-word sentences, 3-word sentences. It's just incredible. You can almost imagine King standing before the same door that Eddie Dean is, with his eyes closed, creating this world, creating 1977 in his mind as he's typing these words out. It's just beautiful. Yeah. And it's like, it has so much emotion and rhythm to it. And I just love Stephen King's writing so much.
Yeah. It's mesmerizing. It's hypnotic. To hear it read aloud, you just get pulled into the sensorium of it. Like, and this is the kind of writing that I love, where and it's been a while since we talked about this explicitly, but the idea that Stephen King is prone to pulling you into the story by providing excessive detail in a way where it's almost a thing people make fun of. Where, they'll make fun of the fact that I think you were the one who said, like, it's never a soda, it's a Coca-Cola. And he's doing that sort of thing here, where it's like somewhere there's a sound of a jackhammer, and that old Lovin' Spoonful song. It's like it's like very specific things that you very easily, they almost against your will, your mind calls them into your mental imagination space. And he's just hitting you with so many of these things so fast that you really do feel like you've been transported, which I think is exactly what's supposed to happen, because he's pulling himself into this world with his mind so strongly that it makes the orb create the world for him, or summon the world for him, or whatever.
Yeah. I love the taxis, like saying the cabbies are getting $1.25 on the drop and 30 cents every fifth of a mile thereafter. It was less before and it'll be more after, but this is now, the dancing point of now. That's so beautiful. Yeah. Like that, just like it just flows to it. Like this is how much they're getting, and it's more than they used to get, but it's less than they'll get in the future. This is now. And then you're absolutely right that he connects the Pepsi to it. Like the space shuttle with the teacher on board hasn't blown up yet. John Lennon is still alive, right? Like these are recognizable events in our world too, that allow us to anchor ourselves. Not just Eddie anchors himself, but us, the reader.
I have a stupid question about John Lennon, though. He says John Lennon wouldn't be alive much longer if he doesn't stop messing with that heroin. And I'm like, John Lennon was murdered.
Yes.
What does that have to do with heroin? Does Eddie not know that he was murdered?
No, he died in 1980. Yeah.
And when does
gotta know. Why does our lack of knowledge about John Lennon keep coming up on this podcast? Last week it was Hey Jude. Now it's death.
But why does Eddie talk about heroin? Whatever. All right, fine.
I don't know. I mean, maybe he's just like, I don't know. I don't know enough about his death. His death was just like a crazed fan, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I mean, I was okay. The reason I'm bringing it up is I was like, is this a Dark Tower thing? Is it like in Eddie's recollection, John Lennon died of a heroin overdose in his world? Just a complete random like just confusion. I was just confused by that, and it stuck in my head. So
I don't know
either.
All right. So Eddie walks through that door and finds himself back in New York City, 1977. And I love how quickly and clearly it is made evident that this is not his home anymore. Eddie notes the noise and the smell, and none of this is the same reverence. Like, I love that paragraph we just read before. Like, there was this reverence for this world. Like he this time in his life in this world, and he channeled to get there, and it was love for it. And then he actually walks in it, and he's physically there, and he doesn't like it.
Yeah, stinks.
And we also see that he can't stop the Calla speak or the Midworld speak either. He's not code switching back to New York Eddie. He's saying, "Cry your pardon, but could you tell me what day it is?" And then he says, the guy says, 1977, that's correct. Won't be 1978 for another 6 months. Think of that. Thank you, Sai. Thank you, what? Like, he can't stop talking Midworld.
And he doesn't care. Like, he says, like, he's not embarrassed He doesn't give a shit. He's not even awkward about seeming like a crazy person. He just doesn't care. He's not from here. This isn't real to him anymore. Midworld is real to him now. It's really good.
Yeah, and he knows he's just going to go home anyway. Like, who cares if some random dude on the street thinks he's crazy?
Yeah.
So Eddie heads to the Manhattan Restaurant of the Mind and finds, Balazar's car out front and the store empty. You see, place was empty. Calvin Tower had been called away, and maybe there'd been a family emergency. He's got an emergency, all right, the gunslinger's cold voice spoke up in Eddie's head. It came in that gray auto carriage. And look again at the counter, Eddie. Only this time, why don't you actually use your eyes instead of just letting the light pour through them? Sometimes he thought in the voices of other people. He guessed lots of people did that. It was a way of changing perspectives a little, seeing stuff from another angle. But this didn't feel like that kind of pretending. This felt like old, long, tall, and ugly actually talking to him inside his head. Eddie looked at the counter again. This time he saw a strew of plastic chessmen on the marble and the overturned coffee cup. This time he saw the spectacles lying on the floor between two of the stools. One of the lenses cracked. Oh boy, lots to talk about here, Matt.
Yeah. I mean, we talked a long time ago about how interesting it is that Roland always has all these voices talking in his head. And, Eddie has Henry talking in his head sometimes. And, it's a bit of a writerly affectation. It's just a bit of thing that we accept in our fiction. But I think in this story, it might be more than that because we've clearly got psychic stuff going on at times. And Roland, imagination Roland says auto carriage, which probably is the sort of word that Roland would use. And it's like, yeah, that really does seem psychic to me. But at the same time, like, we know that Roland can't actually see through the door. So how's that working exactly? That's
magic.
Magic. Yeah. Okay.
No, I mean, I think you're right. And I think going back to the big thing that I'm holding on to is Eddie has become the Roland for this portion of the adventure, right? He is, in essence, Roland here. And you're absolutely right that I wonder how Roland would describe the voices in his head. When he hears his father, when he hears Court, when he hears Vinay, would he call it as, this is just a way of changing my perspectives a little, seeing stuff from another angle? Would he call this as a kind of pretending, or would he describe it the way that Eddie is describing it here? This feels like that person actually talking to me inside my head. And we don't know. But I wonder. Yeah,
I'm seriously curious, and I have been for a long time actually. What is the level of psychicness versus just like, it's a book, and so sometimes you imagine that people can talk in your head.
Sure. One of the most interesting things about this entire interaction, though, and I think another thing that relates Eddie back to the gunslinger, to Roland, is Eddie's anger here. He sees these broken spectacles, he sees the overturned coffee cup, and he gets this dull, pulsing anger that begins as he looks at the signs of Balazar's cronies' assault. This is the anger of a gunslinger, and he says here that if you get enough waves of it, it strips you of your senses and your reason and leaves only violence. And I love this quote. He had once asked Roland if this happened to him, and Roland had replied, "It happens to all of us." When Eddie had shaken his head and responded that he wasn't like Roland, not him, not Suze, not Jake, the gunslinger had said nothing. And so, yeah, I mean, like we've been talking about this all chapter. We talked about this back during the first night of the Kamala, where Eddie gave his speech about how and we talked about how much he had changed and matured and how much he seemed more gunslingery. And I look at this as an extension of that. Once again, this is him becoming Roland-esque in this moment.
Yeah. I think that may be like the arc of Eddie in this book. You could say is him going from wherever he was at the end of the last book, which honestly was not that much more developed than he'd been at the end of the previous book, because most of that book was Roland's story. Going from kind of being that guy who's not very sure of himself and still a bit of a fuck up, you could say, and becoming much more competent and reliable and gunslingerly.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Seems to be the direction we're going, at least. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Eddie breaks into the bookstore and uses a page from How the Grinch Stole Christmas to keep the broken door shut. And he says to himself, never liked the way this one ended anyway. He thought, what? How, do people not like the end of How the Grinch Stole Christmas?
Well, I just know that I wrote a lot about this, Scott, so...
Oh, you did?
Bear with me.
Okay.
So the Grinch is like a classic Christmas story, right? Because like all Christmas stories basically have the same plot. There's a bad or flawed person learning gratitude and generosity, and then this personal change enables them to find belonging, and that's the plot. That's the plot of A Christmas Carol, The Santa Claus, Nightmare Before Christmas, It's a Wonderful Life, and of course the classic Bad Santa. These movies are all pretty unrealistic because like they're all really optimistic about the capacity of shitty, selfish people to change very, very quickly when their shittiness is shoved in their face. I mean, that's sort of the point, right? The point of them is to show like, but people can change. And I think maybe Eddie doesn't believe that. Like, I wonder what this implies about the direction the story is going, because Roland is kind of a shitty person. And the story has been pretty firm that like he keeps getting the mistakes that he's made shoved in his face, but he really doesn't change. I mean, he changes in small ways, but not on central things, not on his quest for the tower, for example. Like, so if Roland is like a Grinch or a Scrooge, he's not. He keeps making the same mistakes, right? It's as if Scrooge woke up and he's like, yeah, I'm lonely as hell. Oh well, time to go back to work and count my money. Like that's the kind of. So yeah, I'm gonna yes. I'm serious about this, Scott. This throwaway line about the Grinch is extremely important to the book.
I'm really impressed with you. Not because I'm declaring you correct about this or incorrect or anything, but I just thought it was funny that he was being mean to a story I really like, and suddenly you've crafted this wonderful theory out of it that I adore. So that's really cool, Matt. I like that a lot. Let's pay attention to that. Yeah, let's not forget this conversation.
We'll use this. We'll call it the like Roland is the Grinch theory or something like that.
Roland is the Grinch theory. Yeah, Got it. So Eddie walks into the back and finds our old pals Jack Andolini and George Biondi talking with Calvin Tower, threatening to burn some of his most valuable books. But all Tower has to do is give them a verbal commitment to sell the lot. That's it. Not even like sign anything. Just verbally say, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And he still won't, Matt. He still won't do it. Even if they're going to burn a $7,500 book.
Yeah.
So Eddie sneaks up on the two guys, and then, he's great, Matt. He's really fucking great. Awesome. He pretends to be their old friend for just a moment to disarm them, and then he beats the living shit out of them, smashing George with the butt of Roland's gun, hitting Jack across the face with it. It's a gunslinger moment. It absolutely is.
It's so badass because like Eddie. Like the Eddie we met at the start of this story would have been terrified here. Like there was a similar situation where I think it was just like maybe not literally these two guys, but like Jack Andolini and some other guy come to pick him up, and he's like shitting his pants. Yeah. And here he just takes on both of them, and he's not even scared. He's just like, no, yeah, I'm just gonna deal with this. Yeah,
yeah, it's great. And then to really sell this moment, I love that King then transfers over to Calvin Tower's point of view and watches the scene play out, and he doesn't see Eddie Dean as his savior here. Like, he doesn't see him as his hero first. He sees him as this third terrifying picture. I think he says those two were bad. This one could be worse. And he describes him as the new one, the one who seemed to merge with his own shadow and become as tall as a giant. Eddie Dean? Eddie Dean?
I mean, it's such a Roland-esque description too.
Yeah,
it's making him out to be this larger than life superhero type. I love it.
And I don't want to shit on Eddie Dean, right? I love Eddie. I love Eddie to death. He's one of my favorite characters in fiction. But like, that's not the way we would have described this guy ever. Even when he was doing badass stuff in the previous books, that is just not the way he would have been described by anyone.
Yeah.
But King allows us to see him through the point of view of someone who's never seen him before, and we see exactly who he has become.
Yeah. 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 I mean, Tower sees Eddie the way that Eddie first saw Roland, as just this crazed hard case. He's just here to kick ass and completely uncompromising. It's great.
Yeah, yeah. And then Eddie threatens to kill both of these men. And I think there's this moment, I don't know, maybe you can tell me if you felt this way, but there's this moment when you as the reader are like, wait, what the fuck? Eddie can't kill these guys. We know what happens to these guys. We know they die in like 10 years, right? Right? Because we know one of them gets eaten by a lobstrosity. And then King, almost as if sensing that that's happening in our mind, drops this on us. Suppose I told you that it's your Ka to meet me again 10 years from now and to be eaten by lobstrosities, that they'll start with the feet inside your Gucci loafers and work their way up. Andolini wouldn't believe him, of course, any more than he believed Roland's big old revolver would work until Eddie had demonstrated the truth. And along this track of possibility, on this level of the tower, Andolini might not be eaten by lobstrosities, because this world was different from all the others. This was level 19 of the Dark Tower. Eddie felt it. So, Matt, what's up?
Well, I increasingly have no idea. But I do suppose that this means like this world is not actually the world that Eddie left from, meaning that there is another Eddie Dean in this world and he's not destined to be snatched up by Roland. Because like Andolini would recognize Eddie Dean in the future, right? He'd be like, hey, you're that...
Maybe, yeah.
You're that guy who smashed my face in 10 years ago. But maybe if that Andolini had seen him in the past, or are we working on a different time travel rules? Or are we on Back to the Future time travel rules? Like maybe Eddie and Susanna and Jake are all from level 18 of the tower. Or maybe they're all from different levels of the tower. These are all questions. I have no idea. I'm just confused.
They are questions, that's for sure. I wish I had an answer for you.
I understand.
So Eddie handles Jack Andolini in the only way a gunslinger would, making it clear that Tower will not be selling the lot to Sombra because, well, he's going to be selling it to the Tet Corporation instead. Got that?
That's great.
Yes, the Dark Tower, the epic fantasy western in which heroes incorporate in order to beat the bad guys in their nefarious game of Manhattan real estate negotiation.
Yeah, gotta get those forms in.
Bet you didn't see that coming.
I didn't.
So here's some more Eddie channeling Roland here. Mr. Calvin Tower has come under the protection of people more powerful and more ruthless than you could ever imagine, Jack. People who make Il Roche look like a hippie flower child at Woodstock. You have to convince him that he has nothing to gain by continuing to harass Calvin Tower and everything to lose. I can't, as for you, know that the mark of Gilead is on this man. If you ever touch him again, if you ever even step foot in this shop again, I'll come to Brooklyn and kill your wife and children. Then I'll find your mother and father and kill them. Then I'll kill your mother's sisters and your father's brothers. Then I'll kill your grandparents if they're still alive. You, I'll save for last. Do you believe me? And the thing is, in this moment, Jack Andolini does believe him. And I just want to stress once again that the last time Eddie saw this man, he was a naked junkie in desperate need for a fix. Like that, it's remarkable.
Yeah. So it's so fucking satisfying. And Jack Andolini was this scary, he was like the intelligent enforcer of El Roche. I was probably more scared of Jack Andolini than I was of the boss. And now he's like gulp. It's great. It's great.
Yeah, he's legitimately terrified.
Yeah.
And I love the line that, like, when they're talking a little bit later, he's like, the thing that would most get Balazar's attention is that someone was capable of scaring Jack Andolini in this way. Which again just goes to show this is not like a Bebop and Rocksteady, bumbling henchman, right? This guy's hardcore, and Eddie has just scared the shit out of him.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
So Eddie sends the two gangsters packing and then sits down to palaver with Cy Tower. There's a lot of fun details in this section that I only noticed upon reread. Up until this point, King was keeping the point of view pretty firmly locked away into these little mini sections. Like we have these. We pondered about what to call them last week, and I don't know the answer to that. Like each chapter has little sections. Yeah, I think numbered sections.
Yeah, section is fine by me. But
yeah. So we jumped from Tower's point of view to Eddie's point of view, and then back again in each of the new numbered sections. In this one, section 9, the point of view jumps back and forth between the two of them constantly as they're talking in this one section, almost as if to signify structurally that this is a meeting of the minds. And I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that made a lot of sense. Cool. Sorry,
go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, just overall, I think it was really satisfying to see how badass Eddie looks from Tower's perspective, right?
Yeah.
So like that's we were talking a minute ago about how awesome Eddie is. Well, part of that is we're switching from his perspective to Tower's and back, and we're like, okay, well, you get a totally different impression of Eddie in Eddie's head versus Tower's head. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I like that too. I like how that plays in.
Especially once he's put the giant gun away.
Yeah.
Eddie tries to give Tower credit for having the strength to hold on to the vacant lot despite all these gangsters, but he won't take that credit. He just has a hard time letting go of things, he says. That's Ka, right? Like, what a perfect character to put in charge of the vacant lot, right?
Yeah.
Someone who can't let go of things.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, the other thing he was having a hard time letting go of, that $7,500 book that was threatening to being burned. Well, the title of the book was The Dogan. The author was Benjamin Slightman Jr. And we're at fucking 19ville now, Matt.
I mean, this seems even more 19 than 19. This is this a coincidence, or is this literally Ben Slightman came through a doorway at some point and wrote a book? I mean, everything's on the table now. Who knows?
Yeah. So we learn that the title of the book is actually The Hogan, which is a kind of Native American home. It's a valuable book because it was misprinted to the Dogan, which is a meaningless word that means nothing and will never mean anything. Don't bother remembering that word, Matt, because it's meaningless, and there's definitely no reason that this chapter and the next chapter are named the Dogan. Got it?
I'm sure there will be no implications to be found in this.
Good. Now we can just move on.
Okay.
There is a part of me, and this is when I just want to kind of go really crazy with you here, Matt. There's a part of me that sees a bit of Stephen himself in this discussion of rare books. Like Eddie and Calvin have a discussion about rare books here, and I'm wondering which side Stephen King would put himself on in this discussion. Does he see value in spending thousands of dollars on rare books in which you will never read or even open? Or is he more on Eddie's side, which is like, that's stupid and a waste? What is the point of having a book if you're not going to read it?
Well, I suspect, at least within this book, that he probably sees collectors in general as a kind of addict, because that seems to be what Tower is. Like they don't use the word here, but it seems like Tower is a hoarder. And I think I've got a minor streak of that tendency. Like I have a really hard time throwing away certain types of thing. I can relate to the compulsive feeling of it. It feels very similar to other types of compulsions or other types of addictive behaviors that we kind of all have experience with. So here we have, again, actually, Ka is using an addict, actually not just using the addict, but using the addict's addiction to its own purposes. Here, saying, okay, you have trouble getting rid of things. Well, I'm going to use you to hold on to this vacant lot because I know you're never going to let go of it. And
sure. Yeah. I mean, I can't I spend so much money on books. Like, it's embarrassing how much, Folio Society, right?
Uh-huh.
That's my heroine. There's a Folio Society version of Dracula, a book I've never read, for $345. I'm looking at it right now, and I want it. I want it so bad.
Yeah, I don't know.
So yeah, I mean, I do think on the other hand, Calvin Tower makes an argument that you collect the rare ones, and if you want to read the book, you can buy a cheap paperback copy and read that, and it's fine. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there is something to be said about collecting but I do agree that to go back to the metaphor, to go back to what the actual story is about, Calvin Tower is addicted to hoarding, is to collecting, and that is exactly what the story is using him for. Yeah,
well, it seems like in the same way that you can enjoy a beer on weekends and that's fine. You can be a collector of things and that can be fine, but Calvin Tower is not Calvin Tower is to that as alcoholics are to alcohol. It's
yes,
he's not,
exactly.
he's not doing it in a healthy way. It's ruined his life basically. So yeah.
Matt, should I spend $200 on this Folio Society version of a Game of Thrones?
Do whatever you need to do, Scott.
I'm closing this website. It's not good for me.
Oh man.
All right. So finally, they get down to business. Eddie tells Tower that he needs to get the fuck out of town because Eddie's death threats are going to be about as effective as Roland's were back in the Calla, right? It didn't work at all. The message about the plate throwing spread through the Calla anyway. And despite Eddie being a total badass here, the gangsters will be back.
Yeah.
And just like the wolves of the Calla, the wolves of New York always come back.
Yeah.
Tower suggests New Hampshire for a place to hang out, or Maine. I hear Maine is just lovely this time of year. Then he gets to the next part. While up north, Cal Tower needs to draw up the paperwork to sell the vacant lot to the Tet Corporation for $1.
Uh-huh.
Calvin Tower is hesitant at first. He doesn't completely trust Eddie, but he has a test. Once this envelope held the will of my great-great-great-grandfather, Calvin Tower said. It was dated March 19th, 1846. Now there's nothing but a single piece of paper with a name written on it. If you can tell me what that name is, young man, I'll do as you ask. And so, Eddie mused, it comes down to another riddle. Only this time it wasn't 4 lives that hung upon the answer, but all of existence. Thank God it's an easy one, he thought. It's Deshane, Eddie said. The first name will be either Roland or the name of my din, or Stephen, the name of his father. All the blood seemed to fall out of Calvin Tower's face. Eddie had no idea how the man was able to keep his feet. My dear God in heaven, he said. Mad, what?
I mean, at some point, Roland's going to have to go back in time to like a long ass time ago to talk to Mr. Torin. I guess.
Yeah, we see that the piece of paper has Roland Deschaines of the line of Eld written on it, right? And so, yeah, it's paper is from March 19th, 1846. Hey, that's 19 as well. 1846 is 19,
of course.
By the way, if you don't start adding up every number or all the letters of names at this point in the book, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah. No, I think I'm just doing it passively as we go through, honestly. and it's pretty much always 19. And so it's not even worth commenting on.
Yeah. I mean, this is crazy though. This is absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
But it works. It was enough to get Calvin Tower on their side. The rest of the conversation goes on from here, but Eddie has passed the test, and Cal will sell the lot to the Tet Corporation. So hooray! But we have to talk about, I think, one of the most important things about this section is that Eddie realizes in this moment that he doesn't much like Calvin Tower. What Eddie had discovered about Tower during their palaver was dismaying. He harbored some respect for the man, for any man who could hold out for more than 20 seconds against Balazar's goons, but didn't like him much. There was a kind of willful stupidity about him. Eddie thought it was self-created and maybe propped up by his analyst, who would tell him about how he had to take care of himself, how he had to be the captain of his own ship, the author of his own destiny, respect his own desires, all that blah blah. All the little code words and terms that meant it was all right to be a selfish fuck, that it was noble even. When Tower told Eddie that Aaron Deepnow was his only friend, Eddie wasn't surprised. What surprised him was that Tower had any friends at all. Such a man could never be Katet, and made Eddie uneasy to know that their destinies were so tightly bound together. Oh boy, Matt, let's talk about this for a little bit.
Sure. You know, in one sense, I kind of took Eddie at face value, but then I thought about it, and also I was like, yeah, I don't know if Eddie's being entirely fair to Tower, because I think maybe what's happening here is Eddie sees a little bit too much of himself in Tower. And don't get me wrong, I love Eddie, but this just feels like the kind of criticism that you reserve for somebody who you know is a lot like you, but is just different enough to rub you wrong, or maybe is a lot like you, you know, not a lot like old Eddie, a lot like junkie Eddie. So I do wonder if he's going to learn that he's wrong about Tower at some point, because, you know, we do know that Tower goes on to save Callahan and you know, really puts his life on the line for that. So yeah, I ultimately I'm kind of like, I don't know if you're being entirely fair to Tower there, Eddie.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also something to be said about the fact that, like, the story and Ka and Eddie needed Calvin Tower to be a bit of a selfish fuck, right?
Yeah.
Like the desire to hold on to and refuse to give up things that he owned was what kept the lot out of the hands of the bad guys. And so like sometimes we need people like this, and you're not going to like them, but you need him.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I totally agree with you that there is a bit of himself he could see in there, like a kind of willful stupidity about him. I think you could describe the Eddie that we saw sitting on the plane with heroin strapped to him, willfully stupid.
Right.
I think you could call him. He had something underneath, right? He had that. He's always had that sharp edge underneath, that iron underneath. But yeah, there was some stupid parts to him, and
he was the prisoner, and in a certain sense, Tower is the prisoner of his own addictions here.
Sure, yeah. So Eddie then explains how Tower will communicate to them where he ends up going up north, which will definitely not be in Maine.
No.
It's a really complicated method where they're going to leave a zip code written. I think Deep Now is going to leave a zip code written on the fence next to the vacant lot. But before Calvin Tower agrees to all this, he has one more requirement. He wants Eddie to take his rarest books through to the Unfound Door and into Midworld to keep them safe. It's so, because like he didn't know there was a door there. He just like reasoned he saw this weird shimmer, and Eddie kept looking back there. So he's just like, there's a door there, right? Take these things with you. And it's so funny how annoyed by this Eddie is.
It's great. It's so funny. I mean, also just the fact that Tower just kind of accepts that there's an interdimensional door. I mean,
right.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Mm-hmm. It's really wonderful, and I think it shows, like his addiction is still firmly there, right? He can't let go of these things. He knows that the shop is going to be burned down, and that's what Roland says. Is like they're definitely going to burn down the shop, right? So you just save the things that were important to him.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, it's just good writing, right? Because it's what this character would be concerned about in this moment. And Eddie's like, how can you care about this shit? And it's like, it's his heroin, man.
Yeah.
But like it's exactly the kind of thing you would have done back in the day.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, he did literally take the heroin into Midworld. Yeah. So, exactly. Or have Roland do it.
Yeah. Literally the same thing. Literally the same exact thing. Yeah. That's hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing we haven't been talking about is that while Eddie has been in New York, Roland has been sitting in the cave with Black 13 open in front of him, and it's wearing at him. He put the bullets in his ears to kind of stop it, just like the thinning noise, but it's wearing at him slowly and surely, and it's only making his dry twist worse, right? To the point where we don't think he's just going to bounce back as soon as we shut the box.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't remember if I said this or not, but it kind of reinforces this idea that like the proximity to the orb is what's making him sick. Because it seems like this wasn't mentioned at all prior to this book when they got close enough to the orb.
Sure.
And the description of his suffering here was so vivid to me that like when he finally gets to close the box at the end of the scene, I almost like groaned with like relief because I don't know. There's yet again he writes so well that it made me feel sympathy for Roland.
Sure, I like that. Yeah, I mean it's really rough, and I think Eddie's constantly like looking back and seeing him kind of suffer silently there, motivating him to hurry up. Even as Calvin Tower's like, I want to talk to you about books.
Right.
I love books.
Yeah.
And so they're talking, back to our conversation about Calvin Tower. Eddie says, his courage didn't strike me as real courage. It was more like greed. Not all are called to the way of the sword or the gun or the ship, but all serve Ka. Really? Does the Crimson King or the low men and women Callahan talked about? Roland didn't reply.
Well, that's an interesting question.
It does. Right. Right. If no one is above Ka, said the man in black last week, right? No one is above Ka. We all serve Ka. Then what about these folks?
Yeah, I mean, and if the answer is yes, they do serve Ka, then this kind of goes to this idea that Ka is not good. Ka just is. I mean, I see Ka as the storyteller, and sometimes a story needs drama. and drama is more fun if there's antagonists.
Sure.
So
yeah,
if
yeah, like I think it's a fun thing we could do right now is mirror the Walter and Callahan conversation to the Eddie and Roland conversation. Both are talking to a person that they're about to send through a door or that has returned from a door. And they're both talking about their enemies. To the Man in Black, it's Roland and his quartet. To Roland, it's the Crimson King, the Low Men, these people. And they're both talking about how none of them are above Ka. Roland is not above Ka. The Crimson King is not above Ka. Who's right here? They're both. It's the same conversation, just on different sides.
I like that. I like that mirror a lot. That's really cool. Good pull.
Yeah. So Eddie almost immediately relays that the book has now made him think that Ben Slightman the Elder is the spy, to which Roland, of course, replies that he already knows that.
Of course I already know that, yeah.
Yeah. And it's for the exact same reason that we saw Jake kind of realize earlier on. It's his glasses. No one has glasses except for him. Where did he get those? Maybe he got them from some bad guys, some wolves. We don't know. They don't go out to confront the Slightmans, though. And this chapter and this week's reading ends on that's Jake's part. Like they say, because this is Jake's part in it. So we're not going to ride out to the farm and confront these people. This is what Jake's job is. So, okay.
Yeah. And that's kind of fucked up, right? I mean, like he's just kind of throwing Jake into this situation that like he knows that Jake is in a bad situation. And he hasn't had this conversation with him. He's just like, all right, you're going to have to go ruin your friend's life. You're going to be the one responsible for it. Bye.
You know what I'm going to say?
You're going to say, I don't know.
That's Ka, baby.
That's Ka, baby. Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's Ka. All right.
It's time for Jake's part in it. So maybe next week we'll get to see what Jake's confrontation with the Slightmans look like.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm not going to read anything into the fact that the name of the chapter strongly suggests that.
What could a Dogan be?
A dog man? Dog man?
Okay. I love this, Matt. This is so fun. But we only have 8 minutes left to read like 30 discussion questions. So we should get right into that. So that is it for this week's reading. We'll be back next week to read, I think it's the next 3. I actually don't have my schedule up and I don't know if I put it in the notes, Matt. What have I done?
Oh, no.
What have I done? Everything's falling apart. I'm killing time as I open my schedule document. Next week, we will be reading chapters 3 through 5.
All right. And you've just wasted another minute of our time, Scott. All right, let's go.
No. The discussion question from last week is, what is your favorite told tale in storytelling, aka a moment where a character tells a story to another character?
All right. And we have Malacalypse Asunder. I'm not going to try to pronounce things right. There's no time. They say, one of my favorite told tales is Canterbury Tales type format of the first Hyperion book. The way the stories reveal deeper aspects of the preceding and following tales is so enjoyable as it slowly builds up this very lived-in feeling universe, each time with slightly different lens to color the components it presents. Yep, I love that book. I love that book. In fact, it's like that book grows more. I grow more fond the more I think about it over time, because we did a book club on it, but there's a book club episode. You can check out the Doofcast. We did a book club. It was a great discussion. I love that book. Yeah, totally agree. Pear Jane says, I love told tales, and I'm going with sections from Neil Gaiman's Dream Country, the third Sandman series. If you've read it, listen to the audiobook. He includes 2 told tales, one in A Dream of a Thousand Cats, a world where a cat tells the story of a bygone world where humans are the pets and prey of felines. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, we're retold the tale of my favorite Shakespeare play, only the audience is made up of characters from the play, so it's pretty much a Stephen King merry-go-round of referential fun. So I figure we'll get a Sandman podcast sometime around 2025 after you've run through all of the Dark Tower adjacent novels. I have not read Sandman, but well, that's not true. I read the first one. That's it. And actually, 2 of our friends on our network, Ruben and Elliot, who do a podcast of their own, did a pilot season thing where they were trying out some formats of different shows, and they did an episode on the Sandman. So if you want to head to doofmedia.com and search Sandman, you'll probably find that one episode if you want to listen to that. They might end up doing a full show on that. I don't know. Yeah. They haven't decided yet. Cool. Let's see if we've also done a show on this next one, Scott. Okay. Unplugged Gem says their favorite story within a story is Django Unchained, when Christoph Waltz's character, Dr. Schultz, a German dentist bounty hunter, is surprised by Django's wife's name, Brumhilde. The dentist finds out that Brumhilde is not only a slave with a German name, but also speaks German. Seeing how surprised Schultz is at this, Django wants to know why, and Schultz tells the German story of Brumhilde to a very attentive Django, who sits on the ground in front of him with his legs crossed and such an expectant expression on his face. I always find it so endearing. It reminds me of when I was a kid during story hour in kindergarten, and how oral storytelling was almost as good as watching television. Yeah, I mean, I love that. I love that moment, and like you just know that was kind of the point of telling Django, who's really this badass character, like, all right, sit there and look so excited to be told the story, you know?
Yeah. Next, we have Luke V, who says, I'm going to break the rules with this one and choose 2. How dare you? My favorite told tale comes from the Song of Ice and Fire series. There are so many occurrences of awesome told tales in these books, but the ones I wanted to bring up are the tale of the long night told by old Nan to Bran, and Jaime's story of why he really killed the Mad King to Brienne. I love the former for all the crazy theories fans have come up with, and because it's fucking metal. I love the latter because George presented a character we are meant to despise, but he pulls a sneaky on us, and with the story plants the seeds for why we come to love him and his redemption arc. Also holding out hope for future books, not doing him dirty like the show did. Well, I think that's safe.
Yeah, I feel fairly confident if those books come out.
Yeah.
Tight Rhymes says, my first thought was The Princess Bride, but I'm not sure if it counts since the present of the story is really a thin framing device for the actual story of the told tale. I
think it counts. I don't know about you. I think,
sure, why not? Yeah.
Because the author made a choice to do it in that format, and that changes how you look at the story, especially in the book. I think the book, it's even more important than in the film.
Yeah, I haven't read the book, but that is my understanding. They also mention Reservoir Dogs, where the told tale isn't something that ever happened within the story. It's a lie to ingratiate the mole, Mr. Orange, to the rest of the criminal crew. I love that we see the stages of him practicing this story before he gives his performance of it, and we actually see the scene unfold as if it happened in real life. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, love that. Divide by Hero says, my favorite told tale is The Usual Suspects. The whole movie is a tale that Verbal Kint tells the police in an interview. The story we're shown is a really fun heist movie in and of itself. But of course, spoilers for The Usual Suspects, if you are spoiler free for The Usual Suspects,
God bless you. Go watch the movie. Do not stop the podcast now.
Yes. It turns out that Verbal is lying his ass off, and the story we've been watching did not actually happen, at least not in the way we're shown. I think unreliable narrator told tales are really interesting, right? Because it's using storytelling to manipulate us into believing bullshit.
Yeah.
It's using the power of stories.
Right. And
I love it.
It makes it really fun to think about afterward. Kids are like, was the whole thing made up, or was it, or just parts of it made up? And it's like a puzzle. It makes it into a puzzle.
Yeah.
Matt Said Words says, I always love the way King uses told stories. In It, Mike Hamlin hears his father tell the story of the black spot and the massacre that happened there. Upon my first read, the story seemed slow and was essentially an aside from the novel as a whole, but the way it builds up and up and up just floored me by the end. Another comes from The Body with the pie eating contest. So delightfully disgusting. Lastly, they say in The Wind Through the Keyhole, there's one of these also. I'm blurring my vision now because I can't.
Yeah. It's not that much of a spoiler. There is a told tale in The Wind Through the Keyhole. Cool. That's all you need to know.
I mean, there's been several in the Dark Tower, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a Dark Towerism. Yeah. Runeberg says, if any Kings fans have not read John Langan's The Fisherman, do yourself a favor and check it out. A huge chunk of the middle section of that book is a long story of cosmic horror told in a New England diner after two friends ask the cook about a fishing spot the locals won't give them directions to. My other one is all the stories in Hyperion, especially the priest's story and the father's story. Yeah, love it.
Cool. Yeah. Pearl 420 says, my favorite told tale would have to be Gandalf telling of how he traveled through the depths of Moria battling the Balrog, laying there dying and returning as Gandalf the White. Quite simply, Tolkien set the standard. Yeah, I love that. It brings in this tone into the story that is amazing.
Yeah, totally agree. Good one. Shortstop 88 says, my favorite told tale is from the manga One Piece. One Piece and many anime like it often show flashbacks to a character's past, even those of particular villains in the story. In the most recent story arcs of the series, one character, a samurai named Kinemon, tells the story of a former leader of his nation who had been betrayed and killed. His name was Odin. When the story was told, to the main characters, the audience was not given the story, only the characters' reactions to different parts of it. However, months later, after a cliffhanger in the story, the author spent 30 or so chapters on the story of this great man Odin. His story ended up crossing paths with many of the great important characters of the overall One Piece story, and it gave the audience some insight into the personalities of these characters that we've heard about over the 23 plus years of the story being written. Jesus.
Well, that's just too long. You got to wrap that up. Rorschach Roadkill says their favorite told tale is Frankenstein. The whole book is a series of nested told tales. It's written as a letter from Captain Welton in which he retells that Victor Frankenstein has told to him. Then, delightfully, we go down another level as we get the creature's point of view related by Frankenstein. Shelley uses the format brilliantly to switch points of view and give the reader sympathy with and horror at both Frankenstein and the creature.
Good answer.
Cool. I didn't realize it was that complicated.
Fat Bears 621 says they bought a round for the sailor and they heard his tale of a world that was so far away. So the first thing that popped into my head when you asked about told tales was the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, which starts with a grizzled old sailor stopping the narrator at a wedding to spin his story about being at sea, killing an albatross, and totally dooming his shipmates. It's a total genre stew that includes a cursed and redeemed, maybe, sailor, death personified, horrifying sea creatures, madness, death, undeath, and so on. Lots to enjoy. But thinking of this poem and its framing device reminded me of my actual favorite told tale, Fish and Bird by Tom Waits, a beautiful, almost lullaby whose lyrics evoke the ache of being loved across impossible distances. And they've nicely sent us a link for it, so we can go listen to this, Matt.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. I'll go do that. Jake D says, my favorite told tale story is one of my favorite short stories ever, Murder Mysteries by Neil Gaiman. I first read it in a collection of shorts entitled Midnight Graffiti, which I picked up because it included Rainy Season by Stephen King. Without spoiling too much, a man sits on a bench outside his hotel in the wee hours of the morning smoking. A stranger comes up to him and asks for a smoke and offers a quarter of one. The man refuses the payment, gives it to him for free. The stranger smokes the cigarette, then says, I owe you something. You wouldn't take the money. You want to hear a story, a true story? Stories always used to be good for payment. These days, not so much. And then they go on to say that the story is an otherworldly tale, which sounds very Neil Gaiman to me.
Yeah. I think, told tales as the framing devices of stories is used a lot in short stories because it's just a fun way to talk about the power of stories and storytelling. Like this, yeah. I've not read this, but it seems like that framing device allows us to declare with authority, look at how powerful stories are. I'm going to use the story as a payment.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Cool.
Steve D says, have to go with The Matrix. Think of the first time we all listened to Morpheus explain to Neo the state of the real world. The visuals from that scene still haunt me. We don't know who struck first, us or them, but we know that it was us that scorched the sky. So much to take in all at once. Loved it. Yeah,
I showed my kids The Matrix recently. I think that may be my favorite movie, actually.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. It's such a fucking good movie.
It is very good. We did an episode on that. I love how many of these things we've done episodes on.
Me too. DB says favorite example is a story in blah blah blah. Sorry, I'm just the Prince's Tale in the final Harry Potter book. Yeah. After a slow burn of 7 doorstop-sized novels, J.K. Rowling finally provided us the answers to questions ravenous fans had been asking for, a decade? What made it so effective was how it humanized a cold and mysterious character by truly showing us their memories. Show don't tell is a good writer's mantra, and we saw it all. Readers would never have believed the deeds of this controversial character if they were simply told.
Yeah, that's totally true.
That was definitely a moment that I remember when that book came out, and everyone was pretty blown away by that.
Yep. Next, we have All84001, who says, best told tale, Gremlins, when Phoebe Cates recalls the horrific story of her father getting stuck in the chimney on Christmas Eve and dying. Blew my tiny brain the first time I saw the movie. What a messed up story to include in what is by all rights a kid's movie. Oh my God, best answer. No. What a crazy movie. I love that movie so much. Now I have another reason to hate Christmas.
That's hilarious.
And then Gremlins 2 makes fun of it, which is really wonderful. Gremlins 2 is the best movie ever.
I forgot about Gremlins. All right. Daniel M. says, I'm sure I'll think of something. For now, I just keep thinking of Black Spot story from It, which is the Dick Halloran origin story. That story was horrifying for reasons besides Pennywise. Once again, King shows us how horrible good old-fashioned regular people can be. Those dudes and the wretched folks from Bag of Bones were cut from the same ilk. Reading that story makes Halloran's parts in The Shining and Dr. Sleep a much richer experience. Now I'm off to think about 5 better answers and to shake my head at myself.
Good answer, though. Good answer. Is there any on here that you were surprised you didn't see? I expected someone to answer Kingkiller because I love those books, but no one did.
I was definitely expecting Kingkiller for sure, because that's the whole framing device of the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But perhaps people are so frustrated with the fact that the last book in that is never coming out that they just don't want to consider it anymore.
Titanic would be another one.
Yes, that is true. It took me a second. That's true. It is Titanic.
Yeah.
You went from Kingkiller to Titanic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you sort of forgot for a second tells you what a resonant and important fact the told taleness of it was.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right, next week's question, Matt. I had a little bit of trouble this week, so not my favorite, but I think we'll get some good answers from this one. Eddie Dean gets another total badass moment this week, one of many that he's gotten throughout the series so far, and I want to hear about what your favorite badass Eddie moment from the first 5 books is so far, right? Nothing for spoilers beyond this part. Matt, it's not a spoiler to say Eddie's going to get some more badass moments before this series is done, but we don't want to hear about those yet. So what about in book 2 through 5?
All right.
Yes. The end. That is it for us here on Kingslingers this week. Next week, we will continue part 3, The Wolves, by reading chapters 3, 4, and 5.
All right. Remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, reddit.com/r/doofmedia is a great place to hang out and to answer the discussion question there as well.
If you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so, and make sure you never miss a single episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts.
Yeah, and if you like any of our shows on this network and you want to support us, consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. If you donate at the $20 level, you can force us to do an episode of our variety podcast on a movie of your choice. So if there's some other told tale film that has occurred to you that you really think that it needs a Scott and Matt discussion, just check out the Patreon and let us know.
Yeah, and make sure you check out the Doofcast this week, because one of our patrons has done that and made us watch Frank Darabont's The Mist, adapted by the Stephen King novel, short story rather, of the same name. That episode should be out on Friday morning, the 18th, and you definitely don't want to miss it, because I think it's going to be a really fun conversation. Matt and I haven't recorded it yet, so I'm just guessing that it's going to be a good conversation, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. I watched that movie right before we started recording, and still fucking love it.
Uh-huh. And I haven't finished it yet, ever. Special thanks this week to new patrons, Bidoofs, Stefan H., and Garz Lade.
Yes, thank you so much to you and everyone else who has donated to us on Patreon. We really do appreciate that. And if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. Just keep sharing, keep retweeting, keep subtweeting.
TikTok.
Yeah, TikTok. Do some TikToks about, yeah.
Substack.
What is that?
It's like a, I don't really understand, actually. It's a good question. Make a Substack and then talk about us on there.
Okay. Yes, do that.
Yep.
Or you could just leave us a rating and a review. on Apple Podcasts. This week's Spotlight Review comes from Jazz Photo, who gives us 5 stars and says, a wonderful way to revisit The Dark Tower. I've been contemplating rereading the series and accidentally came across this awesome podcast. It's so great to revisit the series in this manner, allowing thoughts and contemplations about the books that I may have overlooked on my first time through many years ago. I thoroughly enjoy every minute. Once I catch up to you, I will grab my books and read along. Thank you. Thank you, Jazz Photo. And I accidentally came across this podcast. Our marketing team is not doing its job.
Yeah, we'll send him some notes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jazz, and everyone else who has taken the time to leave those rating and reviews. We see them tick up every week, and it is such a joy to see them. Little inside baseball, I pull a bunch of reviews at the same time and put it in our spreadsheet, because you know me in spreadsheets. And then I kind of pull them one at a time from the spreadsheets into the script for us to read. And then when I run out, I have to pull another whole bunch. This last week I ran out, so I had to pull another whole big set. And so I just got to read all y'all's nice words like for 20 minutes this morning. And that makes you feel good. It makes you feel real good. So we really do appreciate those. We are reading them all, and we're going to slowly get through them as we go through the show. But keep them up, keep them coming. It is so nice to see, and it really does help us. People seeing your 5 stars maybe convinces them to give us a shot.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right, folks, we went over by 10 minutes. I'm so sorry. I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed of myself, but regardless, we will see you back here next week, as I refuse to apologize for that shame and just keep on doing what I'm doing. We'll see you then, folks. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.